8 o'clock Monday morning. I've already put in an hour of chores at the farm by the time I turn up at the school, a one-room country schoolhouse at the edge of a wheat field. I look at these kids with their restless faces, grandchildren of the pioneers, descendants of the long rifle and the bull-tongue plow. I find myself wondering, that proud, searching spirit that drove men out along new trails, is it still alive in them, in me? I wonder if this familiar stretch of land were suddenly to become frontier again, how would we meet the test? It may not be long before we know. There's a tense feeling in the air, a sense of waiting, as though some great door is about to swing open. I remember.
The fine young person in our society are generally threefold. First, loving parents. Secondly, intelligent teachers. And thirdly, a wholesome environment in which to grow up. But all too many of our young people today lack one, two, or even all three of these elements. And therefore, we have what we call juvenile delinquency. The community then has an obligation to provide those missing elements. When I speak of the community, I mean society generally, officially, and also private organizations which work in this field. Any private organization that gives to youngsters the opportunity to do something useful and constructive gives them a chance then of belonging, of participating, of winning the approval and approbation of their elders and of their contemporaries. Any such organization in our society today is doing a most useful and constructive thing, both for the young people and for the community in which they live.
Well, back to the old plantation. Shucking and jiving, ain't that sweet? We'll show you how it's done. Always. Ain't that cold? We'll give you a little sample. You look like Elvis before he went to service. Those are a couple of my good friends, they're squares. Looks like the fight of Patterson and Inglemark, but it's not. A left to the right, a left to the jaw, a right to the chin, a feet to the chest, a knife in his back, brass knuckle on his head. Someone is on the
The Detroit Public Library houses the world-famous Burton Historical Collection. Adjacent is the Detroit Historical Museum. And within the metropolitan complex stands historic Greenfield Village, one of the greatest tourist attractions in the United States. The village and museum stand as an enduring monument to the genius of Henry Ford. Typical of Detroit's many institutions of higher education, the vigorously growing campus of Wayne State University. Like other colleges and schools in the metropolitan area, its modern architecture is creating a new image of beauty and function. Medical research at Wayne State University puts Detroit in the forefront of the never-ending battle to conquer disease. The most modern of hospitals serve Detroit's needs. The city's many medical facilities are soon to be joined by a magnificent...
But it is quicker and maybe better. At least it stopped Bob from making any more mistakes. Betty, too, has discovered that she had forgotten a couple of items of behavior. She is thinking that perhaps she and Bob both need to be embarrassed a bit to make them admit that their manners aren't as good as they should be. Bob may be thinking the same thing, because he certainly looks as if he has decided to make a lot of changes. The others, of course, say nothing. Betty decides that the first thing for her to do is to regain her poise. Just act as though no errors had been made. But she will be more observing of her own manners and those of others, too. Betty feels safe in her way of eating a roll and jelly. Is there anything in what Bernie and Helen are doing that would get your attention right away? Was there anything in the way he helped himself to more jelly? How about the way he holds his knife and fork? Or the way he cuts his meat? And takes it to his mouth with his left hand. When you are eating meat, do you take the meat to your mouth with the fork in your right hand or your left? Is there a question of correctness here? Helen is also using her left hand. Betty holds the fork in her left hand while cutting the meat, and then passes the fork to her right hand for placing it in her mouth. This is zigzag eating. She has noticed that the British and continental people usually use their left hands. But now that she is beginning to take her manners seriously, she wonders if there is a matter of correctness involved or whether both ways are equally correct. One way American, the other European. Betty wishes she were as certain of that point as she is of how her knife should be placed. Bob has never heard of zigzag or continental ways of eating meat, but he is on the watch out for such things now. And as soon as he notices what Betty is doing, he is ready to follow her example, whether she is right or wrong. He uses his left hand all right, even if he does take an oversized bite. Bob congratulates himself on trying a new way. He and Betty have a lot to learn. At least there are no further mishaps as the meat course is finished and the table cleared for dessert. Bob is happy now and is proud of himself. Formal parties like this are really enjoyable when one isn't afraid of doing the wrong thing. Bob has reached the point where he feels that since his intentions are good and he is watching himself, that all is well. If you just try to figure out what is the reason for each rule of etiquette, you find that the rules are sensible. After all, correct manners are simply the way one person shows his consideration for another.
Allowed to dry on the dishes for 12 hours. Dried on for 12 hours. Dried on until it clings to every dish with such tough resistance that it seems impossible to remove without long soaking or scraping. And there are no special rules for these dishes in this test performance. No special handling or placing in the racks. They are going to get the same kind of a wash that normally soiled dishes get. The racks for holding the dishes are so made that you simply cannot put dishes any place, top or bottom, where they will escape the positive brushing action of the hot water. This dishwasher is loaded to full capacity. Complete service for a family of 6. Dishes, glassware, and silverware. All soiled with the tough, dried-on mixture of mustard and egg film, in a way never encountered in daily home use. They're all inside, and the detergent is added. We're ready to go now. The top is lowered, the switch turned on, and the stopwatch started. In about 9 3/4 minutes at normal 55-pound city water pressure, we'll see what has taken place inside this new, revolutionary Youngstown Kitchen's automatic dishwasher with its positive hydro brush spray action. Right.
New types of instruments were developed, and the telephone grew up with a growing America. The demand for telephone service snowballed. Indeed, the use of the telephone became so tremendous that by the 1920s, dial service was rapidly being introduced to help handle the increased volume of calls. As the calls increased, more operators were needed. More calls to handle meant more jobs to do and more people to fill those jobs. This has been the story all through the development of the telephone. For instance, in the days when we had little or no dial service, the Bell system had 270,000 employees. By the time 70% of the telephones were dial, there were 600,000 employees, more than twice as many. But the remarkable use of the telephone was only part of the story of change in American life. As villages became towns, and towns became industrial cities, people's interests broadened. Where those early citizens were thrilled to telephone across town, people now wanted to call towns and cities across the nation. Finally, they wanted their voices to span the oceans. And they did. Truly, America had grown up. All of which brings us back to Englewood. From many of Englewood's telephones, you could already dial any one of more than 4 million other telephones in the surrounding territory. A fine example of modern telephone service, and therefore a fine proving ground for this new type of long-distance service. A proving ground to answer such questions as, will customers like the service? Do they find it easy to use? What improvements can be made?
All interest earnings may be forthcoming. Interest earnings last year contributed more than $234 million to the company's income. But if the rate of interest earned in 1929 had prevailed last year, our income in 1947 would have been about $180 million greater, and this would have greatly increased the amount available for dividends. Metropolitan's income is received from 2 sources. First, premiums and other payments from policyholders, and second, earnings on investments. In 1947, the company's income amounted to nearly $1.4 billion. Out of this income, more than $1.160 billion came from policyholders, and about $235 million from earnings on the company's investments. As compared with this income, more than $671 million were paid to policyholders and beneficiaries, and more than $473 million were set aside for future obligations. Thus, a total of $1.150 billion were paid or set aside for the benefit of policyholders and beneficiaries including about $5 million for health and welfare. The balance, $247 million, went for taxes, asset adjustment, and the expense of doing business. Taxes took about $22.5 million. Asset adjustments about $20 million. And the remainder, more than $204 million, was used to provide the necessary services which metropolitan policyholders expect and to which they are entitled.
The Panama Canal, 22 years ago. First, we go to the bottom of things and find ourselves sidetracked on the floor of the world-famous Gaillard Cut, which perhaps is more familiar to you under the name of Culebra Cut. Now we are traveling along some of the 160 miles of track that were laid down on the bottom of the canal, track that constantly had to be shifted as the shovels dug away at Mother Earth. Right at this spot in the picture, modern Grace liners float on a watery bridge that rises 45 feet from where these rails are. In the distance now, the lines of tracks are to be seen, and also one gets an idea of the width of the canal. Originally specified to be 200 feet in width at the bottom, President Roosevelt, TR that was, ordered the dimensions changed to 300 feet, costing the United States an extra $13 million, and well worth it. Local and white labor were employed in the building of the canal, the white labor being called the gold standard, the native labor the rest. Here's one of the native signalmen. The government kept one of these men, flag in hand, at every switch in Culebra Cut. It had to, for every minute and a half during the peak of activity in Culebra, a train loaded with dirt rumbled on its way to Gatun Dam and Locks. And despite that, it was almost impossible to keep enough empty cars on hand to tax the capacity of the 101 steam shovels used. We don't want to bore you with figures, but in passing we might mention that the government used over 300 locomotives and over 4,000 cars of rolling stock in this work. Now we are approaching the most famous part of the Culebra Cut. First, a full view of the cut, showing something of its depth, with the steam shovels biting away at it and each chewing off as high as 7 cubic yards at a bite. These particular shovels are working on the famous cucaracha slide. Cucaracha in Spanish means cockroach, and this slide was particularly annoying and disturbing. It was a so-called wet slide caused by the rains and the slipping of soft, wet dirt on a hard layer of rock underneath. The cucaracha in October 1907 slid right across the bottom of the cut, buried 2 shovels, and for 10 days moved an average of 14 feet every 24 hours. But that was just one of the many things that came up in the building of the canal that were overcome with little fuss and furor, and all the time the shovels kept nibbling away. This is one of the locomotives used to haul the dirt trains. I might add, as we wait for one of these many dirt trains, each with 21 loaded cars to pass, that the canal has experienced some 20-odd slides, all told, totaling 25 million yards of earth and covering 220 acres of cut and destroying 200 miles of track. Some of these slides came during the dry season, and they were caused by faults in the earth, breaks occasioned because of the removal of sidewalls and the cutting of the canal.
The tunnels were lined in segmental sections, the invert or base being the first in which the concrete was placed. A gantry crane operating through the tunnel itself handled the concrete throughout this operation. The sidewalls were next lined behind movable steel forms, which traveled through the excavated section on rails laid from portal to portal. The top arch was placed with the use of a concrete gun operated by compressed air. To prepare the canyon walls to receive the abutments of the dam and to remove loose and dangerous rock from the face of the cliffs overhanging the site, many tons of rock were torn away and hurled into the depths of the canyon in a series of spectacular blasts, which occurred almost daily during the period from commencement of operations at the dam site to the time when actual building of the dam began about 2 years later. To reach their positions on the canyon walls, the men engaged in the work of drilling and handling explosives for these huge blasts traveled in cages or skips swung on cables at heights of hundreds of feet over the river. To the casual observer, this dizzy sky ride must have seemed thrilling indeed, but to the workmen themselves it became a matter of course and all a part of the day's job. The first step in preparing for the blast was the drilling of powder holes into the rock of the canyon wall. For this purpose, the jackhammer drill, operated by a single man, was generally used. The holes were then loaded with dynamite, and the blast set off, shattering the air with its detonation and shaking the very earth with its force. After the blast, these acrobatic workmen, known in construction camp parlance as high scalers, swarmed over the face of the cliff to remove the fragments of rock shattered and loosened by the upheaval of the explosion. Only in this manner could the walls be successfully cleared of debris.
How do you do? Week after week for the past few years, it's been my pleasure to report to you on the industrial family that serves the nation, United States Steel. Now I want you to have a look at the record. I want you to see what's happening. I want you to hear from the more than 280,000 workers in that industrial family. They are shattering production records in peacetime, just as they shattered production records in wartime, and they're mighty proud of the fact. Let's check with one of them. Oh, Jim Robbins, you fellows are pretty proud of your production records, aren't you?
We sure are, Mr. Hicks. Of course, you know I wasn't here during the war.
I know you did about a 4-year hitch, didn't you, Jim?
Air Force.
But your dad was here.
My dad's been here for 35 years. One of my uncles more than that. I've got relatives all over the place. Well, see you later.
Yes, relatives all over the place. While Jim was away, they supplied him from the home front, turning out steel for tanks instead of cars, for guns instead of refrigerators. All production was geared to winning the war. Back from defending America, Jim is again in the business of building America. A strong America so essential to world recovery. It's no small order. It requires new and better facilities for the new and better steels advanced by research and technology during the war. Long before the war's end, United States Steel was planning the reconversion to peacetime production. But let's go back and pick up Jim Robbins' story from the day he came home.
A lot of fun, good exercise, and a fine means of transportation. However, you must know the rules of safe riding and obey them, or you will find it a very dangerous sport. A bicycle safety manual may be obtained from either your local safety council or police department. It tells of all the things you should know about bike riding. Study it carefully. It could save your life. For the safest riding, the seat should be adjusted so that with your feet on the pedal, your knee will have a slight bend. Handlebars should be just slightly wider than your shoulders for the best control of your bike under all conditions. When they are too wide, an emergency sharp turn would be impossible. The handlebar and hand grips should occasionally be checked for tightness. Hold the front wheel between your knees and pull the handlebars from side to side and up and down to be sure it is firmly attached. If it is loose, tighten it by using a wrench on the adjustment lug. Be sure the foot pedals are in good condition and oil them occasionally. Never ride a bike with pedals in this condition. Your foot can very easily slip off, causing a spill. Lubrication on a bicycle is just as important as on an automobile. The only points where you should put a few drops of oil are the pedals, the brake,